Welcome to Sustainable AI Futures Conversations. I'm here today with Fieke Jansen. Fieke is a postdoc researcher at the Media Studies Department and a co-principal investigator with a critical infrastructure lab at the University of Amsterdam. Fieke's research interest is to understand how the material impact of expanding infrastructures is shaping the management, distribution, and depletion of natural resources. For example, how data centers are shaping electricity grids, or how big tech is influencing standards on carbon reporting. Fieke did her PhD at the Data Justice Lab of Cardiff University in the UK, where she looked into the social justice issues of datafied policing in Europe. Fieke is also a former Mozilla and Grebe Web Foundation Fellow, where she explored ways to frame the climate crisis as a core digital issues, digital rights issues. And finally, she is also part of the Exploring Sustainability and Environmental Resilience Sustainable AI Futures project, led by Professor Samantha Walton at Bath Spa University, also in the UK. Welcome, Fieke. Thank you so much for being with me today. How are you?
Well, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation, so I'm good.
Great. Yeah, let's get going. I've heard that you've been doing some very interesting stuff lately. So what have you been working on?
Yeah, as you mentioned, I'm the co-PI of the Critical Infrastructure Lab here at the University of Amsterdam. It's also where I'm sitting at the moment at our office with our orange background, because orange is the color of infrastructure. Like if you look at the road, you could see people spray painting where they have to dig up the road to fix something, whether it's like gas pipes or internet cables. And orange is also the color of safety, so you see the orange cone. So we're in an orange room. In an infrastructure room. And we started the lab about 2.5 years ago because the three of us had a really interest to think through about both how does power and contestation happen in internet infrastructures and communication infrastructures. How does it get shaped by it, but also how does it shape society? And we have a keen interest not only about critiquing, so what is going wrong, how are power asymmetries happening, but also how can we co-develop alternative infrastructural futures that center people and planet over profit and control. So we do both things. We look back and we look forward. And I'll also tell a little bit about this. When I got started, like you mentioned, I looked at datafied policing in my PhD. So I did a lot of work on surveillance and data justice issues. But I actually got more interested in sort of the environment, like how does environmental issues relate to infrastructure? And that was also because I got fascinated with how people are talking about it. So I think the first piece of research was really like, how is this new intersection being talked about? How is it problematized by the technical community and by the policy community? And there we really see that technology is offered as a solution to the climate crisis rather than a contributor to the climate crisis. And there's this idea about sort of internet exceptionalism or AI exceptionalism, as if it's not really material. So when we think about the cloud, we think about a fluffy cloud and not data centers on the ground. So that's part of the exceptionalism. And the other thing is that the argument is always made that because we can have Zoom or Teams meetings, we no longer use commute to places. So that also is a reduction of carbon emissions in, for instance, transport or mobility. So it helps other sectors decarbonize. Whereas reality is that we often commute and do the Zoom or Teams meeting at the same time. So it's not either or, it's and. But there's this idea about tech exceptionalism that's very strong when we talk about environmental impact of data of technology, data centers, internet connection, things like this. So that was my first piece of work where I really looked at like how is the internet community framing these issues and what is missing from these debates. And that's really that growth of technology itself is an issue. Nobody talks about it. So it's going to only like help other sectors decarbonize, things like this. And now for the last years, I've also been working on data centers. And then that my interest really got triggered when there was already quite some work being done about how much energy is being consumed in data centers and also how much CO2 emissions are happening. So carbon emissions are happening due to data centers. And it was really about quantifying or understanding sort of like how much protest can, what the impact of protest is against data center, specific data center locations. And while sort of I was reading up about this literature, I saw actually here in the Netherlands, in a town called Zeewolde, there was a lot of protest against the Meta hyperscaler that was being built. And in the end, Meta pulled out. So you could say a lot about, you could say a lot about the governance of how that all came together, or how sort of these the zoning processes went and stuff like this. But in the end, there was a lot of local protest against this data center, and the protest party won in the municipal elections. And then Meta pulled out because it was a political hostile environment. And this was really seen as a local win over global capital. But in reality, what happened was that Meta pulled out, and now they're building this hyperscaler in Spain. So that is the problem, of course, if you do local resistance against a global capitalist system, is that these are actually fast. These are infrastructures that are easily moved to other places. And so this is what they do. They relocate to different places where there's a more friendly political environment for these data centers to emerge. So I really got interested in this idea about how are we governing it now and how can we govern it differently. And I did this through a process where I did interviews and participatory action research. And I first asked people like, what is the environmental impact of data centers? And they talk about like energy consumption, water consumption in certain areas is also a problem, hardware, so supply chain issues, things like this. And then I asked people like, so these are people in the data center industry, but also in municipalities and governments. And then I asked them like, okay, but how do we solve these problems? And the answer was always the market will do it by becoming more efficient, by optimization of things. And so really the power holder was the market, and they will solve all the climate and environmental implications of data centers. And then halfway through the workshops, also the interviews, I asked people, okay, but what if we design from a perspective of scarcity? What if we don't infinitely expand anymore, but treat computational infrastructure as scarce resources? How do we govern this industry then? And then all of a sudden, people could come up with all different imaginations of what should happen. And then the state became a primary power holder. Okay, being said, it was like in Europe, so it was like we have a different relationship to the state than maybe in Latin America or Africa or in Southeast Asia. But it was interesting because they really all of a sudden had said it was about choice. If we treat it as scarce resources and not as infinitely growing infrastructure, then we have to choose what we actually want to spend these resources on, and we cannot leave it up to the market. So it is about, and for this we have to start classifying what happens in these data centers, what type of compute is happening, start thinking through frameworks, how we can sort of prioritize public interest compute over pure commercial compute, really start thinking also about what role do data centers play in priority access to electricity networks, for example. And they also, and then everybody, including data center operators, also realized that, the market itself would not govern this in a way that is geared towards the public interest, and that's why we need the state. And what was also interesting is that at the end, I asked how people felt about this term scarcity, because it's an academic methodology about that's called defamiliarization. So looking differently at an existing problem. So asking people to look differently so they can imagine and empower themselves and imagine different futures. So I also asked at the end how they felt about the term scarcity. And what was interesting is that actually the people operating and owning data centers, they actually said, but we're already operating in a market of scarcity. We just never label it like this because there is already competition over chips, over hardware. There's competition over who gets access to the electricity grid. Nobody's ever just asked us to look at the problem this way.
Interesting. It almost feels like when you actually let people know that there are options, there are
Yeah.
other ideas, there are alternatives. Even the word like scarcity in our culture and in general, like when in public discourse, it almost, I mean, it is a negative in many ways, but no one is really asking questions, like questioning if is this the path that we want to take, right? It's very, very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and there were also limitations to it because it was then it also led to another project, but the limitations were actually that so everybody had this idea about the state that had to then enforce this redistribution of computational resources, but nobody believed that the current state could actually do it. So people had this romantic notion of the welfare state of the 80s, which is also super interesting about sort of like looking back to look to the future. But still, it was primarily a question about redistribution. So it's still very much also in an economic framework. And I think there were like that was one of the biggest limitations. Like nobody thought that maybe computation should be something very different, completely different. Like early in the early days of computation, there were like competing models, and one was also organic computing, but we just invested a lot of money in silicon computing. So this is what our current computational systems look like. So then we started like as with the lab, I started thinking like, okay, so we did this experiment now of swapping values, and all of a sudden people think differently about the governance regime. So moving from growth to scarcity, and how do you then look differently at the computing industry? And then I was like, okay, but what if you swap out materiality from sort of extractive polluting materials to more organic based and biological processes? And then we did this experiment where, together with Sanju Lee, who's an artist who works with electrical gardens, and so in mud, there's a bacteria called the geobacter, and it eats pollution and it exceeds electrodes, and you can make like a small battery out of it. It's very low volume voltage energy that comes from it, electricity that comes from it. But we did it as a sort of a research project where we did it in terms of also workshops, like how do people's imagination about compute change when you start working with organic processes. And so we did it in stages, and the first workshop was still quite theoretical, and people were really like, how much mud do we need to power a data center? So that was like, it's really difficult to get out of the frame we're in, right? Like we need more compute, we need bigger compute, we need faster compute. But then we had to start digging the mud through. We dug mud through all these polluted areas in Amsterdam. And then we started building these mud batteries, and all of a sudden you see that electricity is actually a finite resource, and organic bacteria batteries, you have to take care of them. It's like quite a human relationship you get with these mud batteries. And so then when people started working with it, all of a sudden infrastructure quite alienating. Energy infrastructures, internet infrastructures, they're quite alienated. We just assume that they work, and we only start thinking about them when they break down. But here we actually had to work with them and get a care relationship with them. So then people in these workshops were also like, oh no, but what happens to the geobacter when we drain all the electricity? Do we actually want it? Is electricity so finite and precious? Do we want to use it for the ad tech industry, or do we want to use it for something else? Can we not use it to monitor how the bacteria are doing? So all of a sudden the conversation became very different, and it was really about scaling down compute to fit within what we call planetary boundaries. And so we saw, like, from swapping out values, which is defamiliarization, to swapping out materials, which we call utopian engineering, you really see that people start imagining different futures.
Yeah, it also sounds to me like, people need to, obviously there is AI exceptionalism and there's a lot of like AI hype, but we also don't know sometimes how things that make our life possible work. And this relates directly to how, like, to planetary boundaries. Everything is finite, and it will end eventually. And how do we make do with what we have, and how do we make do with less? And it's a great connection between, like, the climate change and how like AI is being portrayed as a solution to that, and whether we are given alternatives, who is actually voicing these alternatives, how viable they are. And obviously, when you are an engineer or you work in these fields, you know quite a lot about these things, but then the public, because in the end, it is kind of like a public interest issue in many ways, right? The public needs to know more about that, and it almost makes me wonder. We talk a lot about AI literacy and media literacy, but we also don't have planet literacy. Like we don't know how all these resources around us come from and how do they make our life work. And also, like for example, like electricity, it's also like a virtual power somehow, like magic, but it is not, right?
No, it's complicated, and I think these are ways that you can actually sort of start unpacking. Sort of these are also methods where you can start unpacking and engaging with sort of things that seem very invisible, and you make them quite tangible. And by making them tangible, you actually feel you have agency over it again. And I think that's currently missing in a lot of the infrastructures, but also the policy discussions, that most people just feel very like they have unempowered. So people are talking about all of these technologies. People are like also talking about, also in the UK, like the building of these huge data centers, and there's actually very little you can do about it as the general audience, or however you want to frame it. And it feels very disempowering. Whereas if you start, well, playing with it again, and I think play is not the right term for it, but you start opening up these devices again, you actually gain more agency over them, because you start learning how they work, and you can tweak them to how you actually want to use them.
Yeah, it's almost like tinkering, right?
Yes. Yeah, how the internet used to be, you know, with people who were trying to build it themselves and try to make it work for them before it became a commercial network. Yeah.
Do you think this, I mean, there's been a lot of appetite, especially now because we're at this point. I mean, some people think that we're at this point now, which is kind of like a tipping point, that we are looking back in the past and kind of like thinking, but AI wasn't supposed to be like that, or like the internet was supposed to be something else. Do you think this appetite, I mean, there's a lot of appetite about that in academia, but do you think it can go beyond that?
Yeah, yes, I do think it can go beyond this, but I think what is difficult is that it is like the biggest industry at the moment, right? There's so much capital involved, and there's these companies have such deep pockets that it also requires a maybe collective political strategy about sort of like, what is it actually that we do want from technology, and what are the things that we want to exclude from it. And at the moment, everybody's sort of just in the rat race about, oh no, don't want to lose out on this technological race, because maybe we become the periphery. And especially in sort of in political circles, so you see it in the UK, but we also see it in Europe and the Netherlands, is that at the moment we say we want to regulate the tech market, and we say we want to create national champions, but in the end, all of our actions just lead to more centralization of power in the hands of a few technology companies. And I think in part it is because they also don't know how to approach it. It's not it's like, it is a very difficult
Exactly,
question.
yeah.
So it's not only political unwill, but it's also that I think the political analysis of what's going wrong is also very shallow. So
yeah, for sure. I mean, it's also interesting how it was a certain point that the issue like AI as a technology, it got politicized a lot.
yeah.
And now it's been riding on this way for such a long time, talking about AI sovereignty, and the EU is talking about the Eurostack and all of that. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because Alexandra Lutz is now here, and we're doing research into the Cloud and AI Act together, and sort of who is framing the sustainability demands to the European Commission. And we're looking at, the European Commission has set forward a cloud and AI strategy and they put it up for public consultation. So there were like 2 rounds. One is a call for evidence where people could submit something like their own opinion to the EU, and then the public consultation, which you could respond to some of their strategies about investment, deregulation, things like this. And so we're now researching the call for evidence because that's already in the public domain. And yeah, it's super interesting because like from the outset, the frame is already problematic because the idea is that Europe wants to triple the amount of data centers that exist on the continent in the next 5 years, so that we could have enough computational resources to participate in the AI race with China and the US. And sort of that premise is already wrong, because you could also say we already have enough computational resources, we shouldn't expand, but it's more a question about sort of like how do we redistribute the existing data centers that are here and put them towards a specific goal, for example, or a specific cause. And now the assumption is we're going to triple the amount of data centers. You tell us what the best way is to do it is. So you see here that it's like, in this call for evidence, there's a lot of requests for deregulation. So it's like streamline the zoning process so we can speed up the data center build, give people priority access, data centers priority access to the grid. It's very industry minded. So it's really market first, people second, nature third, if it even exists. So sustainability is more seen as, yeah, a side thing to it, and it's really framed in terms of like having enough electricity to power all these data centers. And I think that is the inherent problem at the moment around all the politics around the technology industry. We just think that if we do more of it, we will solve all the issues around sovereignty, about not having enough AI competencies in the continent, and it's similar in the UK, I think. Yeah, and so everything there is more about telling the Commission about how they should facilitate this process so that the data center industry can sort of expand infinitely.
Yeah, that is crazy, actually, to think about that, because there has been some pushback also in the media. There is a pushback, but do you think it's not enough? Like, if someone is like an opinion leader and they want to do some critical work around that, like, what do you think should be the main issue that they should address to let people know, like, to get the word out?
Yeah, I think part of it is our legacy problems, because here they're going to build a hyperscaler in Amsterdam, which in 2022 we had a moratorium on hyperscalers. So you weren't allowed, it's not allowed to build hyperscalers anymore in the Netherlands, except for 2 locations where they already have a Google hyperscaler and a Microsoft hyperscaler, and they can expand. But actually this piece of land and the permits were requested prior to the moratoria. So it's like, yeah, so this part is legacy, because these projects also take longer to come into being, so before they can start building. And what we also see is that usually when people start getting involved or people start asking critical questions is at the end of the trajectory, so that when all the decision making already has happened. So now there's been like example after example in the Netherlands is coming about, sort of like we had in the summer, we had the controversy around Almere, where a data center was given access to the electricity grid. And we have a case of net congestion here. So it's like people are on a waiting list to get connected to the electricity grid. And so this data center got an electricity connection. And now it means that for the next 7 years, schools cannot expand anymore, houses cannot be built, because it will take 7 years to create additional energy infrastructure. In Amsterdam, this hyperscaler will consume the same amount of electricity as all the households in Amsterdam. So that's highly problematic, because there's a waiting list here too. And now other businesses cannot expand, houses cannot be built, because this hyperscaler will consume electricity. And only last week, a new newspaper article came that in Lelystad, which is a different town in the Netherlands, they're also going to construct a data center that is going to consume the same amount of electricity as that town itself. And everything is already like done and dusted, because all the permits have been signed, all the land has been acquired, so that it's like at the end of the line where people finally realize what's going on. And that's in part on purpose, because like in the there has also been cases in the Netherlands where, for instance, Meta acquired land, but through a shell company, so that nobody knew it was Meta that was actually purchasing the land. There were also controversies up north with Google, where they also purchased land through an intermediary, and people didn't know that it was actually a data center buying up this piece of land. Yeah, so it's like it's also obfuscation by design.
That's interesting. I wonder, like, do you think that, I mean, you did say that they know after the fact, so if it's done and dusted, there's little you can do. But besides the fact that, a data center is coming to your town, is it also about, like, do the average citizen in the Netherlands know that there is, like, electricity scarcity and there is a net congestion and all that?
Yeah, I think one of the people know that there's net congestion and electricity scarcity, and I think one of the reasons why data centers became a primary object of contestation in the Netherlands is that I don't know exactly the year, but I think it was around 2018. This Arjan Lubach, who's like a local comedian. His show is more like John Oliver. It's like a political comedy on the national broadcaster. And he's very popular, and he made this skit about how the Netherlands was becoming the hard disk of the world, and that and that sparked all the controversy. Still to this day, I think everything can be traced back to that one skit, and people just know about it now because he is very popular. His TV program is very popular, and it just like put the thing on the public agenda. And actually, the moratorium, I would say, is a direct result of that skit. Then also media started writing a lot of articles about it, very critical articles about it, and then the government was forced to do something about it.
Wow, that's such an interesting story. I would have never known.
Yeah.
That's crazy. I mean, it kind of like gives me hope in a sense that art and entertainment, also when you give it to the masses and you're on TV, you have power and you can do something and, suggest, like, you guys, you should pay attention to that. It's really important. Yeah, I would have never known that story.
No, and now also here with the hyperscaler in Amsterdam is that the Critical Infrastructure Lab, including some other groups, we sent a letter once we found out, to the municipality, the province, and the Environmental Protection Agency, because they're all involved in giving this a permit, with questions like, hey, how was this possible? There was a moratorium. It's not allowed to build hyperscalers in Amsterdam. Why did they get approval to do this? And then we were giving a bit the runaround. They were like, yeah, we're happy to talk, but we're super busy now. Maybe we can talk after the elections, which is in March. And then the press got wind of it. So there were like 2 in-depth pieces in one of the main Dutch newspaper. And then it became like an item on the city council, on the city council meeting. So now it's being discussed, and everybody's like, what happened? Why is there a data scale? Why is there a hyperscaler being built here? So I think in these cases, this amplification through media is like super important because it really puts it on the public agenda.
Wow, yeah, that's great. Great work. Resistance. It sounds like resistance to me. We are in these terms talking about resisting. Wow, that's great. Thanks so much for today. That was very, very illuminating. Yeah, and we should definitely keep in touch and talk more about other things. Yeah, thank you so much, Fieke.
Looking forward to it.